Hello, everybody, wherever you may be. My name is Victor Kgomoeswana, and by now I live by one gospel and one gospel only, and that is Africa is open for business. I've believed in this gospel since at least 2002, and now I go by another gospel as well, and that is Africa Bounces Back. Both these two books sum up my attitude towards Africa as a regional economic area, whatever it is, region, area, whatever you consider it to be. To me, it remains one of the foremost growth frontiers of the world and will be for the next 50 years or so. What I need to talk to you about for the next 15 minutes or so will be why Africa remains open for business and it will bounce back. Two, what the opportunities or some of the opportunities or low-hanging fruit are if you want to do business on the continent. And lastly, some of the tips, the do's and don'ts of doing business on this continent of ours called Africa. Now, whether or not you're born in Africa or not, Kwame Nkrumah said, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa, but I'm an African because Africa was born in me. Therefore, I persuade you to find that Africa in you, because I promise you, wherever you are, whoever you are, there is a bit of Africa in you, and you can find it, grow it, nurture it until it's all you know about. And once you have gone African, it's hard to turn your back on it, as I found out, and as I hope you'll be able to find out in the next few minutes. First of all, why is Africa so attractive, and why am I convinced that Africa will bounce back? Number one, we can talk about growth. Every time you look at the top growing economies of the world, whether you use the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank standards, or the Economist Intelligence Units, it doesn't matter. Even if you just fly to any African country or drive to any African country, growth is always there. But when you rank the top growing economies of the world, the top 10 will always feature at least 5 African economies. Examples include Rwanda, a very small economy, but also medium economies like Ghana on the west coast of Africa, which was known for gold mining. Around 2006 became an oil economy as well. And now it has been more respected in its alliance with Cote d'Ivoire, its neighbor, which is also a cocoa producing country, by forming an alliance that will make sure that the farmers of cocoa in that region are getting a fair deal. And of course, they also go downstream in making sure that they beneficiate the cocoa in getting in on the chocolate factory industry. And therefore, high growth is in Africa. You can compare that to Asia, which is another high growth economic region. You can compare it to South America, South and Central America, or you can compare it to other emerging economies. You will find that Africa comes out tops. Another study that was conducted around 2011, I remember, was by McKinsey. It was called Lions on the Move. And what they did, they said it's okay to measure economic growth of a country, but what about the growth that companies recognize or realize when they do business in these regions? How about the return on investment? How about the compound annual growth rate? And they found that Africa outperformed the stock exchanges in Europe, the stock exchanges in North America. By that, I'm talking about the Dow Joneses of the world. They outperformed the FTSE 400, the FTSE 100. They outperformed the CAC 40. They outperformed Germany and a lot of other stock market indices. And it became clear that not only are the economies of Africa growing, but lots of returns are being realized in the area. The other factor that makes Africa attractive is the fact that it's got the largest surface area. So if you measure the population of the world, you find that about 15% of the world population is on the African continent. But if you measure the land mass, in other words, that part of the planet Earth on which people can live, you find that 20% of it is Africa, which means you can park on the African continent lots of the other countries of the world. You can park North America, all of the US and Canada, you can park the UK, you can take China, you can take India, you can take even Russia and put it on the continent of Africa. There will still be enough space left. That tells you that because of the 1.2 billion or so Africans that are here, the continent can still attract a lot more people to live on it. And that makes it even more interesting because the climate on the African continent has got a range. You've got cold areas like Ethiopia, but you also have hot areas, especially the equatorial countries. And the temperatures are manageable. Of course, they tend to be on the high side, but high temperatures are easier to deal with than icy cold or sub-zero temperatures that you find somewhere. The sun here means the place is livable. The climate is more temperate than anywhere else. The long coastline that we have means you can build coastal cities, you can communicate and trade with the rest of the world via sea routes. And of course, you can develop, as you know, most cities of the world are built around the ocean or along rivers, and therefore it's easier to travel and communicate. And as you look at the position of Africa, it's equidistant from or to many regions. Traveling to China by sea, India, all of the Eastern and Asian countries is easy through the Indian and Pacific Ocean. Traveling to Australia, the same deal. Traveling to North America, across the Atlantic, same story. You can reach the North Pole and the South Pole via sea route from Africa, no problem. You can fly from anywhere in the world into the DRC, for example, which is sort of the center of the universe, in my opinion. And it's almost the same distance to everywhere. Whether you're flying from the equator to Europe, you're flying the equator to Australia, you more or less spend the same amount of time. The people of Africa, another number that works in favor of this continent, is the population. The highest proportion of the population is under the age of 20 or under the age of 25, which means we have the youngest population on the continent, and therefore you can come and run your skills training programs here. You can come and develop a workforce. You'll always have a lot of people to source your workforce from. You can run your programs and whatever you do. The cultures of Africa are also very dynamic. By that I mean Africans, as diverse as we are also adaptable. We can adapt to just about any culture. You know from the colonial history or slave history that we were able to be assimilated or assimilate other people's cultures, whether it's Europe, America, and so on. Therefore, it makes us very dynamic people. So when you do business on the African continent, you don't struggle to be accepted as much as you don't struggle to ingratiate yourself into whatever community you are. Of course, there are French-speaking countries, there are English-speaking countries, Portuguese, Spanish-speaking countries, the Mandarin is making its inroads as well. But in the end, Africans speak English and more or less with an accent that can be understood by the majority of the world population. Those are just some of the areas that you realize. Of course, why can I forget agriculture? The arable land of the world is found on the African continent. So it's almost easy to grow just about anything. You can cultivate anything you want to cultivate on the African soil and it will grow. Rainfall figures in most countries are high enough. Of course, there are dry areas, but with the technology being able to allow you to farm even in dry land, the African continent is going to be the food basket of the world. It's going to be where everybody goes to grow. And if you consider how big and how important agriculture is as a growth economy or as a growth opportunity, you'll understand why Africa is open for business and will remain open for business and will certainly bounce back. So let's talk about some of the low-hanging fruit. What are the areas that you can invest in and realize a return just about guaranteed? I've already mentioned one, agriculture. Everybody in the world is always going to need to eat something. And Africa offers the largest area on which you can farm. Most arable land is found here. And because there's room for you to invest in developing technologies, the use of fertilizers, the use of tractors is still very low. Therefore, even if you're selling agricultural implements, tractors, fertilizers, or technology to farm, you can do business on the African continent. And there are not many crops you cannot grow here, as you already know, from cash crops to just about anything. Tea grows here, coffee originates in Africa. And you get so many other crops that you can grow in many African countries, many animals that you can rear on this continent. The other one is infrastructure. The backlog of Africa in infrastructure leaves room for a lot of investment opportunities. I can start in the southern part of Africa, where South Africa's got the square kilometer array that's going to make communication and much technology possible. You can look at the Beit Bridge, the bridge between Zimbabwe and South Africa, which is one of the most important routes from Cape to Cairo. There's a $200 million project there to improve the bridge and make it more passable and release some of the log jams. You have lots of electricity, power supply that you can, whether you're investing in clean energy, geothermal plants. There was a huge geothermal plant in Kenya, you might know about it, and another wind plant, that power plant that was generated. But you also have in Ethiopia the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is going to generate about 6,000 megawatts of hydroelectricity. We haven't even talked about how much the Congo River can generate in hydropower. But there's also solar energy that makes it possible. Whether you're manufacturing solar panels or you are good at solar technology and you're able to install, you can do a lot of business on the African continent and close the gap, which is lack of access to electricity. We can also talk about roads and infrastructure. I've already talked about that. ICT is another sure winner. And by ICT, information and communications technology, I include from computing to mobile telephony, which now leads us into mobile money. You have all heard of M-Pesa, the innovation that came out of Kenya, and that's where fintech is. Fintech is a high growth sector or industry on the African continent. I'm just mentioning these sectors so that you can see, and there are examples all over of Africans and international or multinationals from everywhere else in the world that are investing in these sectors that I'm mentioning with a lot of success. Consumer products, of course, will always give you a chance or a shoe-in when you are selling to Africans, as long as, of course, you master the bottom of the pyramid economics or strategy. You cannot sell on the African continent where the per capita income tends to be very low. Although there are more millionaires coming out of this economy than most areas, you still have to master the bottom of the pyramid economics that I will refer to now. So the do's and don'ts of doing business on the African continent. Number one, when you see a backlog, see it as an opportunity. Do not look at where there's no electricity and walk away. Go there and invest in developing that. M-Pesa, which was a breakthrough for Safaricom, which is owned by Vodacom, the UK company, saw the lack of banking services in Kenya and did not walk away. Instead, they took their mobile telephony, converted the technology into a banking service. Now M-Pesa has been exported to areas like Romania, India, and you know that innovation is good when it gets exported to other emerging markets. The other thing that you have to understand is doing business on the African continent does not presuppose paying a bribe. People assume that when you do business on the continent, you're going to have to bribe somebody. It's not true. In fact, that is a destructive strategy. You're sure to lose if you make paying bribery or corruption your way of doing business. Because the trends that are on this continent are pointing to the fact that governance is becoming a bigger issue. There are more countries that are electing leaders who are winning on an anti-corruption ticket. I can mention Lazarus Chakwera, the president of Malawi. He won his elections recently on that anti-corruption ticket. You look at what's happening in Liberia. George Weah is doing a lot of good work there. The late John Magufuli was a campaigner and a crusader for corruption busting, especially in the private sector. You mentioned people like Joao Lorenzo in Angola, who came in after Eduardo dos Santos and made sure that he changes the country that had been ranking very low, very poorly on corruption perception index of the Transparency International surveys, and made it the real crusader for anti-corruption and clean governance. So you look at this. I can also mention Zambia, which has had elections recently. You are beginning to see Africans refusing to be painted with a brush of corruption. And there's more shareholder activism. There's a lot more citizen activism. That means that if you try to do business by being corrupt, you'll run into difficulties. The other thing that you have to understand is about sharing and collaborating. Indigenization and local content of what you do is extremely important. When you do business in an area, there's no way you want to come in, install your machines, build your factories, get managers from elsewhere. You import everything and you export the earnings. That does not work. It's not only in Africa, it's everywhere in the world. Indigenization and localization are becoming more and more important. So you've got to find a way of building local content into your business strategy. We can also talk about the Chinese. People talk about the Chinese and say they are colonizing Africa. I understand what they mean by that. But if you think about it, how is China able to get to do business on the African continent and be received so well? The one thing I'll tell you the Chinese have done is they have understood the backlog of Africa. They have understood what Africa lacks. And out of that, they found a way of collaborating. They either come in and give you the infrastructure you don't have, and in return, they negotiate mining rights. Is there a fair deal? I don't know. It depends on what the terms are. But in the end, if you get into a relationship and you start by giving something, you are in a better position to determine what you want to take or what you need. It's a win-win situation. And I believe that by sharing, collaborating, giving something in return for what you need will be the best way to go about doing business on the African continent. There are many other things that I could talk about, the do's and don'ts, but I suppose that if you focus on all those points that I've mentioned, you should be able to do business. You should be able to find a way of making your business a success. Even with COVID having done what it has done, well, I'll close on that note. COVID has taught us the importance of health. It has taught us the importance of strengthening our health systems. That's another big industry in which you can invest on the continent. But it also taught us the importance of digitization or digitalization, ensuring that every community has the infrastructure to work remotely, to teach children from home, to deliver some of the services remotely without physical human contact. And that is where the gap is, investing in the ICT capabilities, making data affordable, making connectivity fast and reliable. Those are just some of the areas that I'm hoping that you will be able to appreciate the value that this continent offers. And let me just close by referring back to what Kgomoeswana said. He said, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa, but I'm an African because Africa was born in me. I hope that you enjoyed this talk and that you will think differently about Africa. You will join the discussion, you'll start making a contribution. And if you're doing business on the continent, share with us the insights of how you've made it, the challenges you've encountered, and how you made it. But whatever is said and done, from tourism to ICT to agriculture to fintech to infrastructure of all sorts, Africa remains open for business, and Africa will certainly bounce back.